Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah. Wassalatu wassalam ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Amma ba'da. Habati fillah. Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. As'al Allah kareem Rabbil arshil azim in yatawallana fi dunya wal akhirah. We ask that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Almighty, accepts our good and forgives our evil, protects us from kulli su' makruh, rectifies our condition in affairs, blesses us all with ilm nafi, rizqan tayyib, wa amalan mutaqabbilan, and may Allah Azza wa Jal clean our hearts and help us to benefit during this holy month of Ramadan. Ahmad, I wanted to mention one hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, so probably keeping it brief, or perhaps maybe we'll just make it and we'll just read a couple of hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And I'm not joking. I literally picked this book up for the first time, and it is absolutely a piece of gold, a gem, fantastic, loving, sweet, tasteful, everything good. Walillahil hamd. And this is an explanation, even though it's brief, of Musnad Imam Ahmad, which is rare to find, and it's called Al-Mujalis Al-Madaniyya fi Sharh Musnad Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal. And it's by half of the Sunnah, it's by Imam Imam Sharif, and his last name Katani, Bihusna, or something like this. Anyhow, fantastic piece of gold, jewels, love it. So we're going to read a hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam about the importance of Islamic brotherhood. And now that we're in Ramadan, even more so that we should be striving to bridge the hearts, to put to bridge the divide between us and love one another for the sake of Allah Azza wa Jal. And so, قال Imam Abu Abdullah Ahmad bin Hanbal rahimahullah ta'ala, قرئ على سفيان سمعت أبا زناد عن أعرج عن أبي هريرة عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم فسمعت سفيان يقول إياكم والظن فإنه أكذب الحديث. So this is a hadith أخرجه Bukhari ومسلم ومالك in Muwatta Imam Malik. And as is mentioned here, he said, وَأَحْمَدْ أَخْتَصَرَهُ, that Imam Ahmad just shortened the hadith. You know, he only brought this part because we're going to read the hadith, the version in Sahih Muslim, which is the version I'm more familiar with, which contains the same alfaz, only it's much longer. So and then we'll translate it. In Sahih Muslim, Abu Hurairah radiyallahu ta'ala, I believe is the Rawi. He says, the Prophet ﷺ said, إِيَّاكُمْ وَالظَّنَّ فَإِنَّ الظَّنَّ أَكْذَبُ الْحَدِيثِ وَلَا تَحَاسَسُوا وَلَا تَجَاسَسُوا وَلَا تَنَافَشُوا وَلَا تَحَاسَدُوا وَلَا تَبَاغَضُوا وَلَا تَدَابَرُوا وَكُونُوا عِبَادَ اللَّهِ إِخْوَانًا. So in the hadith in Sahih Muslim, the Prophet ﷺ said, إِيَّاكُمْ وَالظَّنَّ, beware of suspicion. So especially it's Ramadan, beware of suspicion, even more so. إِيَّاكُمْ وَالظَّنَّ فَإِنَّ الظَّنَّ أَكْذَبُ الْحَدِيثِ, for verily, dhan, suspicion, is the worst of speech. Akthab al-hadith. And he says, وَلَا تَحَاسَسُوا وَلَا تَجَاسَسُوا. We'll see tahassus here, because tahassus is in this love, the one that I'm familiar with is وَلَا تَجَاسَسُوا. وَلَا تَجَاسَسُوا means to not spy. Don't spy on one another. وَلَا تَحَاسَسُوا also, and we'll get to the meaning. وَلَا تَنَافَشُوا وَلَا تَنَافَسُوا. You know, and don't, it's I believe a type of riba, type of, where you're competing with your brother over a good, like you're bidding for something and then you have a plant in the crowd in order to get the higher price. You're collaborating and you're cheating. It's a type of riba. وَلَا تَحَاسَدُوا, and do not envy one another. وَلَا تَبَاغَدُوا, and do not despise or hate one another. وَلَا تَدَابَرُوا, and do not turn your backs on one another. وَكُونُوا عِبَادَ اللَّهِ إِخْوَانًا, and be brothers in Islam. This hadith is azim. This hadith is azim. And it shows us so many important traits that we should avoid, those traits which are madhmuma, sinful. And it also shows us obviously what the opposite is, and that is what is implied, and that is to not have these traits. So he says, when the Prophet ﷺ said, فَإِنَّ الظَّنَّ أَكْذَبُ الْحَدِيثِ, verily dhann, suspicion, is the worst of speech. He says, al-murad an-nahi an dhann as-su. He says, what is meant here is the suspicion which contains evil. So you may have another type of suspicion, and I can't think of what we would call that in English, but su'u dhann, maybe husn dhann, maybe that you don't know exactly, but you put a good spin on it. Okay, so this hadith shows us the importance of being away from su'u dhann, thinking wickedness about your Muslim brother. And Imam Al-Khattabi, rahmatullahi alayhi, rahmatan wasi, he says in his explanation of this hadith, in his book Ma'allam as-Sunan, he says, huwa tahqiq al-dhann wa tasdiquhu duni ma yahjasu fi nafs fa inna dhalika la yamlaku. I can't even begin to translate that, so we're going to leave that. We're going to go on to قال سفيان الظن الذي يأثم به هو ما ظنه وتكلم به فإن لم يتكلم به لم يأثم. So this is a great fa'idah from Sufyan. So Sufyan, rahmatullahi alayhi, he states, he says the dhann, the suspicion, which is sinful, that you're going to get a sin for. He says, huwa ma dhannahu wa takallama bih. This is a fa'idah azima for so much to help us remove sins and be away from sins. He says that this suspicion is the type of suspicion, that the suspicion that you get sin for is the one that you speak about. So for example, you're human. If I see someone, a brother, and I know a single sister, akramakumullah, she lives in an apartment here. And then a single brother that I know or whatever, he's coming out of her apartment. And I see this in broad daylight. I'm human. I'm going to think something. Okay? But the su'u dhann, the wicked suspicion, or putting that in a wicked light and speaking about it and spreading it, this is the evil. But rather, husn dhann would be, well, maybe the brother didn't know that he really shouldn't be alone, and he was because she's a single sister, he was delivering some groceries. So you want to try to put a healthy spin, especially if it ends up that there's some speech about it. And that's why Imam Sufyan, he says, الظن الذي يأثم به هو ما ظنه وتكلم به. He said it's the type of suspicion where you think it and then you speak on it. So if I were to say, hey, I saw Brother Murad leaving Sister Aisha's house. I saw leaving the apartment, man. I think things are going on and this and that. And I start spreading evil. Now look at all the evil. And as some of the scholars mention, that with this suspicion, aghlaba suspicion, most of the suspicion, it comes with speech. It comes with speech. It's a type of spying when you're suspicious and you're spying. And guess what? What is the result? It's speak. You speak about it. So you usually don't spy on someone and then you never speak about it. I mean, that does happen, but mostly, aghlaban, ghaliban, it is through speech. So I'll give you an example that was a tragic example for a particular brother, a brother from my city in Seattle, Washington. He would have been one of those early graduates from our state, from Washington State, but from Seattle. And he was a fairly new Muslim, he was a new Muslim. He was newer. He was newer than me at the time. And he got a chance to study in the Islamic University in Medina, and he accepted. He got accepted. Him and his brother, because they were like twins, and they accepted Islam. He came all the way to Medina, and at that time, there was a lot of fitna, as there unfortunately tends to be among some of the brothers. and sisters. So the brothers were spying. They went in his room because I guess, they used to live in these dorms, and, you'd have a room you share with a roommate. So the roommate went in his stuff while he was at classes or something like this, and, was being suspicious, going in his tapes. What does this guy listen to? And I'll tell you, the dawah to Salafiyah was very new in Seattle, Washington. We had no one really, we had a few people kind of calling to the Sunnah, but, in those days, so the brother had a couple of tapes that were from people who were refuted later, but were generally calling to the Sunnah, but they had possibly some jihadi tendencies. The whole point is the people broke into his stuff and spied and got him kicked out of the university, because then they went to one of the mashayikh, and this sheikh, he, it transpired and got this brother's a new Muslim practically, kicked out of the university in Jami'ah Islamiyah. And this is true. So this is the negative of speech. And what does it mean? It means the result of this suspicion, it usually emanates in what? In speech. And so the Prophet ﷺ said, Iyakum wa-dhann, fa inna dhann akdhab al-hadith. Akdhab al-hadith. He called it hadith. Because suspicion, normally you wouldn't think that it has to do with speech. You're not thinking speech, but mostly when you have suspicion, if you're going to spread that at all, it's going to be through speech. So the Prophet ﷺ said, Inna dhann akdhab al-hadith. So that's a big faida there. So Sufyan said, Huwa ma dhannuhu wa takallama bi. So he says, he defined it as, it is when you, not the su'adhan, but the su'adhan, that this is when you think something, you're suspicious in a negative way, and then you speak about it. Okay? And then he says, فَإِن لَمْ يَتَكَلَّمْ بِي, and this is beautiful. And he says, and if the person does not speak about it, لَمْ يَأْثَمْ, he doesn't get a sin. So that is azim, really. And that shows an important qaida, because it's not just from Sufyan. We know this from a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, that if you think something, you're having doubt, or you think it's something sinful, as long as you don't speak about it. So this is in line with the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. So it lets us know, ahabbati fillah, that do not speak about sinful things, and do not speak about when you have suspicion. Try to do everything possible to clamp your lips, because sometimes we see things that we are pretty sure that person is doing something crazy or haram or something, but it's better for the safety of our religion, integrity, so that way we don't get sin, to not speak about it. You don't need to go and just start telling everybody, I think so-and-so this, I think so-and-so that, and they, it's all dhann. It's all, and it's based on suspicion, and it's based on, what you overwhelmingly think is to be the case. So it shows us the dangers of spying on people and so forth. And tajassus, this refers to spying. So the Prophet ﷺ said, Iyakum wa-dhann, fa inna dhann akdhab al-hadith. Beware of suspicion, for verily suspicion is the worst of speech. And then he said, wala tahassasu, and I'm not sure what hassasa, what it means, and he doesn't define it here, unfortunately. And then he said, wala tajassasu. So if any of you have a copy of Bukhari or Muslim, I don't even know which bab you'd find it in Sahih Muslim, perhaps you can come back and give us what hassasa, what it means. But la tajassasu, the Prophet ﷺ said, so don't spy. He actually does tell us. He says, at-tahassas, wala tajassus, at-tahassas bilha al-istima', li hadith al-qawm. So it's actually very similar to spying. So tahassus is also like listening to the speech of a people. So you're spying and you're listening to what they have to say. Perhaps tajassus, maybe it involves the eyes, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. No. Because he says, وَبِالْجِيمِ الْبَحْث عَنِ الْعَوْرَاتِ. So when it's tajassus, the spying, that this is looking, maybe you're looking for their faults, and you're looking for their faults and their secrets and so forth, and what they normally don't expose. Now, and then the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, in the longer hadith, not the one in Ahmad, he says, let's see, وَتَجَاسَسُوا وَلَا تَنَافَسُوا. So tanafus, this is in reference to a type of buying and barter, in which it's a corrupt type of barter where you're trying to cheat your brother. So you're actually trying to get the prices to go up, and so that either he will not buy and you get it for a lower price, or he has to spend extra money and you benefit the one doing the bid. Okay, you're in league with him. So it's a type of corrupt bartering. So the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam said, وَلَا تَحَاسَسُوا وَلَا تَجَاسَسُوا. Aina? I lost it. وَلَا تَحَاسَسُوا وَلَا تَجَاسَسُوا. Now, إِيَّاكُمْ وَالظَّنَّ وَتَجَاسَسُوا وَلَا تَنَافَسُوا وَلَا تَحَاسَدُوا. Then the Prophet ﷺ said, وَلَا تَحَاسَدُوا, meaning do not have envy of one another. And because envy, we already know all the evil that results from being envious of others. For example, you see someone that they have a nice car, and you become envious, and you want their ni'mah to be removed from them. You want the favor that Allah has blessed them with to be removed from them. Or you want their ni'mah. You want their favor. Man, I wish I had that car. Why do they have that car? And you become envious, and you want the ni'mah to be removed from them and given to you. Or you just want the ni'mah to be removed from them. That's enough for you. You're just happy that they don't have it. So we call those, in this contemporary times, those are true haters, And وَلَا تَنَافَسُوا وَلَا تَحَاسَدُوا وَلَا تَبَاغَضُوا. So then the Prophet ﷺ said, لَا تَبَاغَضُوا. So that means between you as Muslims, you should not have hatred. You should not have hatred. And this is a very important and stern warning from the Prophet ﷺ. We know the concept of al-wala wal-bara, that we should love and hate for the sake of Allah Azza wa Jal. Loving those things Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves, and hating those things that Allah Azza wa Jal hates. And when it comes to dealing with the people of bid'ah, because they're Muslim, that you should not have hate mutlaqan. You should not be over excessive in your hatred for them. So when we read those athar of the Salaf, you have to put them in context, and you have to understand the level of the bid'ah of the people, and also the level of hatred. There's a difference between bid'ah mukaffara wa bid'ah ghayra mukaffara. There's bid'ah that takes you out of the fold of Islam, which we say bid'ah mukaffara, and then there's bid'ah ghayra mukaffara, bid'ah that doesn't take you out of the fold of Islam. So bid'ah has different levels, and the people of bid'ah have different levels. So your association with them and your being away from them is mutafawid. It's tafawid. It's not all the same. You don't say, oh, this guy, I saw him with Jama'at Tabligh. I hate him for the sake of Allah, and I'm not going to speak to him, And then you see someone else who's has bid'ah mughallada. They negate the qadr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or they have this. It's not the same. You don't treat them the same. They are not the same. Okay? Ahl bid'ah tafawid wa ahl sunnah tafawid. The people of bid'ah, they have different levels, and the people of sunnah have different levels. And so the shahid here of why I'm even talking about this is to let us know is to not have excessive hatred. Do not be to such a level that bughd, that hatred. Because what you find sometimes, unfortunately, even in the practice, and sometimes even between scholars, you'll see that some of the speech that they have, it's almost like they have hatred between one another. And you are not ordered to follow that. Okay? If someone is from Ahl Bid'ah, Naam, you you're going to make inkar of them. You're going to have, but be careful of just going to any extreme and to where you think that you should have so much hatred that you want to harm this person, or you want to, because this is unfortunately what the juhal, a lot of ignorant people, end up doing. They understand that, they've been told so much, oh, these people are mubtadi'ah, they're this and that and the other, to such an extent, and they don't have the background in Sharia, they don't have the background in ilm, they don't know the fiqh fi deen, they don't know masalih wa mafasid, so they just think, hey, we need to roll on this fool, we need to do something to him, we need to hurt him. That's because they don't have a mizan, they don't have a Sharia-based mizan, based on the book and the sunnah, and based on fiqh fi deen, and knowing too that the people have different levels. Someone who is has some little small bid'ah, they have a mistake here or a mistake there, and it's a bid'ah. It's not like the one who's on a methodology. Their minhaj totally is bid'ah, how they approach the Quran and so forth, okay? And the lay persons is not like the caller, okay? The lay persons is not like the caller to that madhab and to that way of that aqidah and that minhaj. So it's very important to know and understand that between the brothers, as the Prophet ﷺ said, وَكُنُّوا عِبَادَ اللَّهِ إِخْوَانًا, and be brothers, for the sake of Allah, basically, as Muslims. Now, then the Prophet ﷺ said, وَلَا تَدَابَرُوا. Okay, so after he mentioned don't have hasad, don't have hatred or enmity, he also mentioned don't turn your backs on one another. So this brings up, well, where does the issue of hajr come from? Well, hajr is also mashru', and it's mashru' from the book and the sunnah. But it lets us know that we should not be eager and rushing to cut one another off, and especially for dunya things. So for something that a business dealing, or whatever, you don't like his shirt, I don't know, whatever it is, do not cut one another off for more than 3 days, as the Prophet ﷺ said, and that is in regards to dunya matters, to worldly matters. It could be a business thing, it could be something you just kind of really, when you met him, you never really got along, whatever the case may be. That type of hajr, meaning that you're not going to give them salams, that should not be more than 3 days, if it's even a Sharia-based maslaha aslan, okay? The other type of hajr that the scholars mention, that we read about in the books of the Salaf, and we hear from some of our ulama and so forth, this is the hajr which is also mashru'. It's also legislated in the book and the sunnah. This hajr doesn't have a limit on it. If it is years, if it is months, la bas. But this hajr is also based on the Sharia. It's not based on our desires. So you can't say, well, I heard him listening to a tape of so-and-so, I'm making hajr of him. And, there's no maslaha. You just don't, that's all you know how to do, okay? Or, so you're doing it from ignorance. So some of the reasons why the hajr is mashru' is if there is some sort of Sharia-based benefit, meaning that the person who has fallen into a bid'ah, or is a person of bid'ah, that you see that by making hajr of them, it is going to bring them back. So some people are affected. Some people, they're affected, and they actually are concerned about that, and they will sometimes come back to the sunnah after having been on bid'ah. So that is one of the reasons, one of the maqasid of hajr. Another reason for hajr of a mubtadi'ah is also, as a Sharia principle, to defend from their harm, to protect yourself. You're afraid from this person. So if you believe not just being around, but I'm saying, the salams and stuff like that this is going to open a door, you're afraid. This person loves to debate. For example, I had an example in Seattle where there was a takfeeree, a Somali brother who had studied in Pakistan. So he was very, he hifdhed a lot. He memorized a lot of matun. He was a talib al-ilm in that. But the people, they praised him and they liked him. But that was one of the first and only individuals that I can recall, one of the first, maybe another, that I've ever made hajr of. Because when I first came back, I came back one summer and I met him. They took me out to lunch, and then it became a huge debate they had invited me. It was like a setup, like, oh, there's this American, he's in Saudi, I want you to meet him and I want you to debate him. He's Salafi and he's talking about this and talking about this, debate him about the leaders. And so we ended up having a drawn out thing when they surprised me threw it out of left field. So we got in this heated thing. So after that, I really didn't, when I would see him, I stopped greeting him. I stopped giving salams. I'd see him in the masjid. I'd turn away because we ended up being in the same masjid, because I ended up teaching there and so forth. So ala kulli hal, if you are fearful that the mubtadi'ah, the mukhalif, can spread their bid'ah to you, or as a way of reprimanding the mukhalif, then those are two reasons for making hajr. Also, another reason, and this was kind of where I was, because I wasn't afraid of, I wasn't going to debate him anymore. That was for sure. And it wasn't actually, it was more of an argument, and that's what usually happens. But I also didn't want to give him a platform. So if I greeted him and was cool with him, then a lot of the shabab that were kind of getting new to the sunnah would have thought, oh yeah, Khalid, he's okay. This guy is okay. This guy's a sheikh, he's okay to study with, and, our local students or whatever are with him or greet him, and everything's all good. So I did not allow that door to be open. I did not. So I stopped giving him salams when I saw him. So if you find either that it's going to affect the mukhalif, or you're protecting yourself, or you're protecting and warning the community, those are three reasons for making hajr of an individual. And right now, in my mind, I can't think of, there are other reasons, but those are the three that jump out, to be protected from their harm, as a kind of punishment, and as also a rectification to bring them back, or to protect the community and warn the community. So those are some of the reasons why you would make hajr. So that does not directly, although it falls under this hadith, but this hadith is just talking about in general and giving us the general usul of how we interact as Muslims, that we should not. The Prophet ﷺ said, "Iyyakum wadh-dhann, fa inna adh-dhann akdhabul hadith, wa la tajassasu, wa la tabaghadu, wa la tadabaru, wa la tahasadu, wa kunnu ibadallahi ikhwanan," or kama qala sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. He mentioned all of those things, warning us against doing those things between Muslims, that we should, as the Prophet ﷺ says in the end, he says, wa kunnu ibadallahi ikhwanan. And be Muslim brothers together. Now, those are just some of the fawaid from this hadith that some of them were mentioned. Now, in another hadith, we'll go to another hadith, inshallah ta'ala. This is also very important because some people have misconceptions about using the miswak during Ramadan. So, قال أبو عبد الله أحمد بن حنبل رحمه الله تعالى قال حدثنا سفيان عن أبي زناد عن أعرج عن أبي هريرة رضي الله تعالى عنه يبلغ به نبي صلى الله عليه وسلم لولا نشق على أمتي لأمرتهم بسواك عند كل صلاة وتأخير العشاء. So this is this hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Imam Ahmad mentioned this. وأخرجه جماعة, meaning Bukhari and Muslim, وغير, and also Imam Malik in his Muwatta, Imam Malik. So this hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and in the version that Imam Ahmad mentioned, he says, "Lola nashukka ala ummati, lola nashukka ala ummati." If I weren't fearful for my ummah, my nation, I would have commanded them to use the miswak, wherever my miswak is, to use the miswak after at every salat, at every prayer time. وَتَخِيرُ الْعِشَاء, and also he mentions تَخِيرُ الْعِشَاء, and also to delay the Salat al-Isha. So both of these are mashru', and both of these are mentioned in other hadith in the other books of the Sunnah, and especially in Bukhari and Muslim. And this hadith is azim. So it shows us in another, also in another riwayah, لِأَمَرْتَهُمْ بِسِوَاكٍ مَعَ كُلِّ وُضُوءٍ. So also Imam Ahmad has in his Musnad a narration where he says, I would have commanded them to use the siwak, the siwak, ma kulli wudu, at every wudu, every time they're making wudu, you're making ablution for prayer. So this shows us, ahabati fillah, the istihbab. The scholars take from this that it's recommended, that it's mustahab to use the miswak, to use your miswak at all times, but especially during the salat time, meaning you're preparing for salat. So, and also at wudu, as is narrated by Imam Ahmad. And this hadith is mashhur, it's well known, and it shows us the importance of the miswak. And some of the fawaid of the miswak is that it is something, it purifies your mouth and it pleases your Lord. And I can't think of how they say it in Arabic. It says something like taharat al-fim wa rida al-rabb, or something like this. So it pleases Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because you're following the sunnah of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, and it's a purification of your mouth. And this is a type, this is hygiene. So it shows us that Allah Azza wa Jal loves the mutatahireen, those who purify themselves, and those who purify themselves spiritually and physically, that they're physically clean and they're spiritually clean. And the miswak is the exemplification of that. And so this hadith, he mentions that it shows us that it is mustahab because the Prophet ﷺ said, Lola. He said, if I weren't afraid, Lola an ashukka ala ummati, if I weren't afraid for my nation, basically afraid for them that it would become an obligation on them to use a miswak. So just think how our lives would be different, because actually when you travel and when you see Muslims even regularly, you don't see a lot of people using miswaks. I don't see, and the only places where I saw, I mean, perhaps in certain in the countries, it's different. In Yemen, definitely I saw a lot of people using the miswak, yes. And Saudi, some people, even though they sell it a lot. So it kind of becomes, and perhaps in the past, it was used more. And in the West, I usually see it amongst more reverts and people who love the sunnah like this and know this aspect of the sunnah, and it's emphasized for them. So you'll see that. Like my circle of friends, you're going to see them with a miswak. The ones, the miswak is very important for us. Whereas a lot of your average Muslims that you find in the masajid in the West, you might not even have miswak sold in some of the local stores, and that's unfortunate because this is an important sunnah, because the Prophet ﷺ said, Lola nashukka ala ummati. If it wasn't for the fact that I was fearful for my nation, I would have ordered them. Liyamartuhum, I would have commanded them to use the miswak. So do your best to revive this sunnah and to gain the benefit, especially while you're fasting too. So some of the people, and I think it's maybe according to one of the madhahib, that they consider it makruh for whatever reason, but the evidence is overwhelming to show that this is an important sunnah to never leave. The Prophet ﷺ asked for a miswak on his deathbed, and he even got a used one. Sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So it shows us the miswak is an important sunnah that we shouldn't leave, and even especially using it in Ramadan, just to keep your mouth fresh. And do not forget, because I don't know, may Allah forgive some of the people, some of the cultures perhaps, do not believe in brushing the tongue. They don't brush their tongues. And that is very negative. That's not a good way of hygiene. And also, it's not following the sunnah, because the Prophet ﷺ brushed his tongue with the miswak. The Prophet ﷺ said, he mentioned that it was mentioned that the Prophet ﷺ, and he had the miswak ala tarf lisanihi wa yaqul wa siwak fi fihi ka'annahu yatahawwa'u. So the Prophet ﷺ was using a miswak, and that he had it on the edge of his tongue. I'm not sure if it's this part or the inside. It's obviously it went inside. And he said, and he made the noise, and it's mentioned in the hadith, wasiwak fi fihi kahannahu yatahawwa'u. And the siwak was in his mouth, kahannahu yatahawwa'u. You know, as if he was trying to make it. So it's that sound, the fact that they have an Arabic verb for that is amazing, and an amazing testimony of the language. And so the Prophet ﷺ was using the miswak on his tongue so much until he would almost choke. So it shows us that from the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, be very thorough in brushing your teeth, but in using the miswak. Okay, and use it while you're fasting. A last mas'ala I want to mention, because it's something I have to deal with, and I'm sure some of you might have to deal with it. Don't be shy necessarily if you're in front, you work around non-Muslims, okay? It's a great way of dawah. Doesn't mean you have to always be doing it, but you do it sometimes. I've had a lot of students, they ask me, and some they make fun of me, but that's okay. That's to their peril. But they know the Muslims use the miswak as well, and it's from the sunnah. So this is also a type of dawah. So you should not abandon that. I don't say you have to be in your business meeting just miswacking away, siwak, but if you use it a little bit here and you keep it neat and so forth, this is good. It can be a good form of dawah. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. Wa sallallahu wa sallam ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. If there's any questions, inshallah ta'ala, we will try to take them, inshallah ta'ala. Now, what is that? Astaghfirullah wa atubu ilayh. Wa alaikum salam rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Hayyakum Allah. Tips for Ramadan. I just did a whole video giving 5 important tips from the Quran about Ramadan. So, to some general tips is very important to keep your intention pure. Make your intention pure for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's a part of having your Ramadan accepted. And it's just, that is something so important to keep your fasting alive. Don't just think you're starting to get hungry now. Your mouth is drier now. Make your intention for Allah, and remember that you are actually doing a great act of ibadah, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves the smell of the fasting person more than the smell of misk. Okay, and if you know what the various types of misk or musk, I love musk, I used to buy all kind of musk in Saudi. So musk is something very pleasurable and enjoyable as a scent, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves the scent of the fasting person who's striving to get the obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the first thing I could say as a tip is to make sure your intention is to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Secondly, is do studies, do talib al-ilm, do some, reciting the Quran kathir, and reading the tafsir, and reading if Arabic's not your language, or you don't have a high competency in Arabic, also reading in your language, if it's English or whatever, reading the explanation of the verses in English. And also kathrat dua, lots of supplication to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Make lots of dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Also, do everything possible to be away from things which are going to distract you during this Ramadan, that are going to be a source of you gaining more sin, or cause you harm, or cause you to test you, and distract you. Also, lots of dhikr, because dhikr is so easy. It's so easy to say subhanallah, alhamdulillah, wallahu akbar, and just praise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Also, be around the believers. So try to get, if you can, if you have a local masjid, or if you're a sister, be around other good sisters, at least visiting and breaking your fast sometimes, and, mixing with the Muslims as much as possible. It's a beautiful festive time as well. Also, and breaking fast with your brothers and sisters, very important as well. Also, even listening to durus and stuff, lectures that will help boost your iman, that you're learning the ahkam of Ramadan and fasting, but also things that are going to increase your iman, make you want to practice, make you want to do good. And I guess a final piece of advice, which is very, very important as well, is to spend in the cause of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So making dua for your brothers and sisters, but also spending whatever you have in the cause of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Spend, especially remembering our brothers and sisters who are going through a type of living hell, if you will, here on earth, in Palestine, or in Sudan, or in other places of conflict, or where people are just hungry. I mean, there are so many. The Rohingyas are now going through more stress and struggle, especially with the U.S. aid being cut. So now those communities are going to suffer because no one's going to look out for them. So many of the Muslim communities, and even non-Muslim communities, you never run out of places to spend and help people, but especially help your brothers and sisters during this time if you can, with even something simple. And there's immense ajr and there's immense forgiveness attached to that sadaqah, attached to that, and especially now during Ramadan. Also, if someone didn't consider tajweed wajib, can they leave off certain parts? So you must recite correctly. So that amount of tajweed that is going to make sure that you are makharij al-huruf, the letters are coming out properly, you're not destroying the meanings, you're not getting sin. If you have enough to where you can recite properly, then this is sufficient. That's the maqsad. The maqsad is not that you memorize several books in tajweed and this and that and the other. That's great for some people. But as far as what you need to be able to recite the Quran properly. You need to be able to pronounce properly. So that way, when you're leading the salat, especially Surah Al-Fatiha, wajib, that you must be able to recite it properly without any serious mistakes that could change the meaning. Otherwise, your salat will be invalid. So it's very important to have at least that much tajweed, that you can recite without making, hopefully without making mistakes or minor mistakes or what have you. But you don't have to be super proficient in tajweed. Everybody doesn't have to have that science. I'm not discouraging you from that, but I'm just saying, as far as what you have to have now. I'm a Muslim living in a Muslim country, but I wonder, is there a big difference when it comes to how easy or hard it is for Muslims to practice their ibadah and enjoy Ramadan in Western countries? are all Western countries the same? So no, all Western countries are not the same. And there are different restrictions, and all communities are not the same. And as far as being a Muslim country, absolutely there's a big difference. Because in a Muslim country, the society is there generally encouraging you. And of course, most of my experience is in Saudi Arabia, but I've been to other Muslim and also Yemen, but I've been to other Muslim countries during Ramadan and non-Muslim countries during Ramadan, which have a huge Muslim population. For example, in Ethiopia, I've spent Ramadans and I've spent Eids there, and it's like being in a Muslim country. I mean, everything is pretty much the same, as far as okay, there's definitely a lot of things that are not. But as far as, having Taraweeh and just the life of Ramadan and just the streets are filled with Muslims and Ibad, the Muslims, there's so many Muslims in Ethiopia, even though it's supposedly Muslim minority country. But you can go to some parts of Ethiopia, which are Muslim villages, Muslim provinces, and those are just like Muslim countries. You even in Addis Ababa, the capital, you're going to hear the adhan when it's time, when Fajr comes in. Most of the places in Addis Ababa, you would pretty much hear, if there's a local masjid somewhere around, you're going to hear the adhan. So it's a big difference. You don't, for example, the situation I'm in a place where it's very, very isolated, very few people anyway, and then even a tiny fraction Muslims. So I work with non-Muslims, 90 or whatever percentage, 90% or something like this. And so it's a big difference. People are eating, drinking, and they don't care to respect, especially because I'm dealing with kids and youngsters, so they don't care anything about that and their language and everything. So you're getting, it's a huge difference. It's a massive difference. And then some other places I could be in America, because America's so big, where you might have a more of a Muslim or a Muslim friendly environment, or you could even work totally with Muslims in a Muslim place, a Muslim restaurant, so where you're mixing. So there's a lot of different scenarios for the people. But being in a Muslim country, none of it equates to being in a Muslim country. I don't care if you're in Morocco, Indonesia, Algeria, or Saudi Arabia. Still, just the fact that it's a Muslim country, you have a different spirit of Ramadan, and reminders, Islamic reminders, and just khair. And a place like Saudi, you just can't compare to, because the dawah is so strong. Even Yemen, the dawah is so strong, and you can go to lectures, you can go to durus with the mashayikh, you can maybe even have iftar with mashayikh, in the haram, as far as, breaking your fast or whatever. It's just so many different opportunities. It's so much more Islamically conducive. The society is there, society is shut down. It's operating by Muslim calendar, and Ramadan, it's alive, Now, so it's a huge difference, huge difference. And every country is going to be different. La ilaha illallah. And if there are no other questions, we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Almighty, to accept our good and forgive our evil, protect us from kulli su' makruh. Wa sallallahu wa sallam ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.